Okay. So I am live. If anybody is starting to join me yet, I'm going to share this to my page. That's why I'm looking at my phone. Okay. All right. For those who are joining me or will be joining me soon, I am excited to be learning Talmud with you. This will be my first experiment. Just testing out some of the equipment. There's a bit of a lag, so you'll have to forgive me for that. So when you comment, you'll that'll be a part of it. So. What are we doing? What are we learning today? Why does it matter? So one of my favorite pieces of text is this one. Not this specific text, but really the tractate in general. It is from Masechet Megillah. What I like about Masechet Megillah. Masechet Megillah is generally about Purim and ends up spinning out to a lot of other things. The rabbis are really associative, and so they spin out. So as they talk about different things, so when they start talking about reading the Megillah, they might talk about reading the Torah or other pieces of text. Today we'll see that they're talking about the reciting of the Shema. And so that's basically that. This was, Megillah is the first Mishnah I ever learned, and also the first Talmud that I ever learned. So I have a personal association to it. So glad to be studying it once again. So I want to give a shout out to Rabbi Patricia Fenton, who was my first Talmud teacher where we learned Megillah. So hello, Sarah. See you there. And so we'll get started. The way we'll do this is we'll read. I'll flip the screen so you can see the text itself, and then I'll read it and I'll try and explain it as best as I can. I'm watching comments on my phone here, and so if you have questions or comments or want to be a part of the conversation, just go ahead and do that. Okay. So what we're looking at here is right above me is the English translation, and then on the left, this way is the Hebrew and will be Aramaic. What you're looking at when you look at the English is the bold is the translation of the text. We're looking at Sefaria.org. It's an amazing resource. I encourage everybody to look at it, to use it. It's great. They just got the Steinsaltz Talmud, which is what we're looking at above. So that non-bolded text right above me is the Steinsaltz commentary where he explains it. So he wrote it originally in Hebrew, and it's sort of explaining in between the gaps of the text. So with that, let's get started. So I'm going to read it in English because I want this to be as accessible as possible to everybody. But the Hebrew and the Aramaic is there. I'll keep track of it so that you can read that as well. So we'll read the first part of the Mishnah, which is a 2nd century text, early rabbinic text, where they basically just lay out the rules, and then later we'll get into the Talmud where they'll have a back and forth and discussion. So we'll read the first part of the Mishnah, which is relevant to the Talmud we're learning, and we'll get started in the Gemara after that. So, with regard to one who reads the Megillah out of order, reading a later section first and then going back to an earlier section, he has not fulfilled his obligation. Now, this is a gendered text, but this really applies to everybody. This is not gendered. I usually try and keep track of that, so I will normally read those things as one has not fulfilled their obligation. You do what's right for you, what feels right for you when you learn this on your own, but that's the way that I'm going to do it. So I see you there, Marissa. Glad you're joining us. Okay, so once again, if you read it out of order, you have not fulfilled your obligation. So if I read chapter 2 and then chapter 1 and then chapter 6 and then doesn't work. I haven't filled my obligation to read the Megillah. So if the next part of the Mishnah, if one read it by heart or from memory, or if they read it in translation, in this case, Steinsaltz reads this as Aramaic, or in any other language that one does not understand, hasn't fulfilled their obligation. So for example, I don't speak Portuguese. If I read it in Portuguese, it doesn't matter that it's a translation. I don't understand it, so it doesn't help at all. However, and then the Mishnah will continue, however, for those who speak a foreign language, one may read the Megillah in that foreign language. So, since the Megillah is written in Hebrew, and foreign language relevant to that would be English, because I understand English, the Mishnah suggests that I can read the Megillah in that language. And we'll see whether or not that's exactly true when we get into the Talmud. And finally, if I speak that foreign language and I heard it in Ashurit, which Steinsaltz understands to be Hebrew, then I have fulfilled my obligation. So regardless of what language I speak, if I've read it in Hebrew, I fulfilled my obligation. And that's what we're doing, and that's what we do now. Right? When we read the Megillah, we always read in Hebrew, covers everybody's bases, no issues. Because, and the subtext here is, even if you don't know Hebrew, it doesn't matter, you still fulfilled your obligation. And for the rabbis, that's the core piece of this. So we're going to skip the next couple sections of Mishnah because they're not related to the Talmud that we're learning, but they're great. You should always study Mishnah. It's the foundation to understanding rabbinics. So I'm going to scroll a little bit here, and you can follow along on your own, or here if you want, whatever is best for you. We'll read along here. So, the Gemara. What is the Gemara? Let me just pause. The Gemara is the commentary expounding of the text by later rabbis on the Mishnah. So, imagine it's 200 years after the Mishnah. You and your fellow rabbis are arguing, discussing, challenging each other, trying to understand what the Mishnah is, trying to make meaning out of it. You know, this is a very technical piece of Talmud. So to understand that the interest for them is to learn not just the obligations, not just the rules, but how to think. And that's ultimately what Talmud is really about. It's understanding how difficulty. So you'll have to bear with me with the broadcast here, whether or not I can't tell if it's me or the thing. So. Okay, it looks like we're good. So we'll get started in the Talmud here. Okay, so it was taught in the Mishnah that one who reads the Megillah out of order has not fulfilled their obligation. So then the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? Now that question fundamentally tells us that they are going to try and find a verse from the Torah or from the Tanakh to pin this opinion to, right? They have to have a source, a reason, a place that they derived this idea from. So the first answer is from Rava. Rava said, this verse states concerning Purim, that they should unfailingly observe these 2 days according to their writing, according to their appointed times every year. Now, this is from the book of Esther, which is appropriate when we're talking about Purim. And so Rava is understanding this verse to tell us then that the word times, right, according to their writing, according to their appointed times every year, that this actually means the 2 days of Purim, the 14th and the 15th of Adar, which was only just a couple of days ago, right, Sunday and Monday this past week, at least this year in 2017. And so we understand this by way of analogy. Right, that's what Steinsaltz is telling us. That just as their appointed times cannot be out of order, therefore the reading, right? So the 15th of Adar and the 14th of Adar can't go in the wrong order, right? The 15th of March can't come before the 14th of March, right? If we're using a different analogy here. then they have to do it in order, and therefore the writing must not be out of order. And the way they're understanding the writing is when I'm reading the Megillah, right? Just as the days can't be in the wrong order, so too we can't read it in the wrong order. Okay, so where we are is trying to understand where these things are derived. That's where Rava got it from. And of course, because this is a back and a forth, the rabbis are going to challenge it. The rabbis, the Gemara rejects this derivation, right? Well, this is not a good evidence, the Gemara is saying here. Right, exactly, Marissa. Right? They need to find a source for the idea, and then they have to challenge it. That's exactly right. So they reject it. It says, is reading written here at all? Right? The text, the verse itself says, observing. It is observing that is written here in the verse, and not reading. As it is written, and here they'll quote it again, that they should unfailingly observe these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed times. Right, so the challenge says, it says observe, it doesn't say read. This is bad proof. We're talking about reading the Megillah. This doesn't count. This doesn't work. All right? Now, that's a pretty reasonable challenge. And now the Gemara, or Rava, or in the voice of Rava, is going to have to resolve it. Right? They're going to have to make it work. Otherwise, it's going to be a thrown-out proof. And so this is what the rabbis say. All right, we're here to write the word rather here. Rather, the proof is from here as it is written, and that these days should be remembered and observed throughout every generation. Now, this is another quote from Esther. And this is how they deal with it. Remembering is juxtaposed to observing, indicating just as observing cannot be out of order, as they should be derived from the words that they should be unfailingly observe these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed times, so too remembering by reading the Megillah may not be out of order. So, just to quickly summarize that piece, the rabbis are saying the word remember, right, that they should unfailingly observe these 2 days according to the writing and according to their appointed times, right, that remembering, that came from the verse above, that these days should be remembered and observed, that when we put remembering and observe together, we then build a relationship between these two ideas. That observing the holiday and reading the holiday are correlated. And so therefore, they resolve this concern that the verse didn't work. Right? So whenever you're reading observe in this context, it also means to remember, and remembering can be done by way of reading the Megillah. Now, you may not find this to be a particularly good challenge, but that's how the rabbis are going to resolve that question in terms of reading it out of order. Now, one measure of Talmud is a sugya, right? That's how you measure a single unit of Talmud. So that's the end of the sugya. That's the end of the first thought conversation that the Talmud wants to have on the Mishnah. And then now, you can tell by this little symbol here, which you can't see, of course, since I'm pointing at the screen, where it says the sages. That little symbol means that they're going to start with a new subject. So we're going to pause. Everything we learned makes sense. Hello, Troy. Nice to see you. Now that we've learned that the first part, we're now going to jump onto the second section here. And now, again, remember, the rabbis are associative. They're much more interested in letting their attention wander over time than being stuck rigidly going from A to B to C to D. So, kind of refreshing the mind for the moment, we're going to get right to a new idea. So I'm going to read it, and then I'll try my best to explain it. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw it in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on my phone here, doing my best, the best that I can. Okay. Now, once again, the bold is the literal translation, and the not bold is the Steinsaltz commentary, originally written in Hebrew, translation here on Sefaria.org. So, once again, the sages taught in a Breita. Now, a Breita is a text from the early rabbinic period of the 2nd century in parallel with the Mishnah, so it has similar authority. It says this halacha, this rule of not reading out of order also applies to Hallel, and also to the recitation of the Shema, and also to the Amidah prayer. meaning that to fulfill one's obligation, one must recite the text of each of these in order. So, for those who are just joining us, we just had this conversation. Hey, Mike, nice to see you. We just read this whole thing about, we have to read it in order, and it sort of got resolved in most of the case. Here the rabbis are saying, okay, that's true about Megillah, but it's also true about these other things. In this case, Hallel, which is a series of psalms that are recited on holidays, and also the recitation of the Shema. Now, the Shema is a couple of paragraphs from Deuteronomy, and if you have a Siddur, now is probably a good time to grab it. If not, try and bring it in here and share what is relevant. And then also with the Amidah, which we're not going to talk about in this video, but maybe in a later video, about the order of the prayers. So the recitation of the Shema is 3 paragraphs, and they have a particular order. Okay, moving along. And then the rabbis are going to ask the same kind of question. From where do we derive that Hallel may not be recited out of order? Right, so first, once again, the first question is, the rabbis are trying to understand, how did we even get here? Where's the rule coming from? So here, we have an answer from Rabbah, a different rabbi. That was Rava above. This is Rabbah now. And he said, as it is written in Hallel, in the Psalms itself, from the rising of the sun until its setting, the Lord's name is to be praised. Right, so it comes from Psalms. So just as sunrise and sunset cannot be reversed, so too Hallel may not be recited out of order. It's a nice drash. It's a nice interpretation that the day goes in a particular order. It doesn't start with, evening and then go to morning. The day goes the normal way, and therefore it's quoted in Hallel. We know that Hallel should be recited in the same way. So that's one answer. Rav Yosef has a different answer. He says it's derived from this verse in Hallel. So he has a different answer. And he says, this is the day that the Lord has made. From a different psalm. Just as the day follows a certain order, so too Hallel must be recited in its proper order. So he has the same basic drash in terms of the day being in a particular order, and therefore we recite it in a particular order, but he finds it from a different place, which kind of just goes to prove there's no one way to think about Judaism. There are lots of ways, fundamentally, even from in the Talmud, which is 15 to 1600 years old. Okay, moving along here. And again, if you have any questions, too far. Any questions or comments, definitely throw them in the thread, and I'll try and respond to them as best I can. So, moving along. We were talking about Hallel, which is a series of verses. We learned from 2 different places, both from Psalms, that we can't recite it out of order. Rav Avia says, and he has a different answer. Now we have 3 answers. It is derived from the verse in Hallel, "Blessed be the name of the Lord," indicating that the blessing of God must be just as it's written, right? Blessed be the name. It could have said, blessed the name of the Lord, but it didn't. It said, blessed be the name. And therefore, it needs to tell us, right, that it has to be in a particular order. That's the argument he made. So that's answer number 3. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, and some say it was Rav Acha bar Yaakov, right? So there's a value in rabbinics that should always quote the person, right? You don't ever take credit for somebody else's teaching, right? I didn't write this Talmud. I can't take credit for it. Well, all we can do is try and quote in the name of, L'shem omro, right? In the name of the person who said it. And since they didn't know exactly who said it, because this is a oral tradition over time, they like to say, okay, it could have been one of these 2 people. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, right? Nachman, the son of Yitzchak, said, and some people say it was Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Acha, the son of Yaakov, who said, it's derived, this idea that we can't recite Hallel out of order, is derived from the end of the verse we mentioned before. From now and forevermore, right? Me'ata ve'ad olam, right? That's also from Psalms. Therefore, it says, Rabbi Steinsaltz, i.e., it should be like time which cannot be reversed. As much as some of us might wish that we, things could go backwards and redo, doesn't work that way. Time moves in one direction, time's arrow, and therefore we need to recite Hallel in that same order. So that's the basic idea right? Different interpretations, different sources for why we can't recite Hallel in the wrong order. And remember, we started talking about, can we recite the Megillah in any order? The answer is no. We can only recite it in order. And we're now associatively gone to somewhere else. We're talking about Hallel. Okay, moving along, and you can see here in the middle of this page that we're actually between two pages. We're at the end of 17a, which is the first side of the page, to 17b, the second side of the page. You can see that on the Hebrew side better than you can on the English side. So, from where do we know one has not fulfilled their obligation of reciting the Shema if they recited it out of order? Okay, so we started with Megillah. They said, oh, this is also true with Hallel and Shema and Amidah, which is the standing prayer. So we did Hallel. We got a couple of answers, 3 to 4 answers, and now we're on Shema. So they've asked that same question. How do we know? What's the source for this? We got to prove our point here. Here we go. It was taught in a Braita. Now remember, Braita is a text from the same period as the Mishnah, about the 2nd century, very authoritative, right? A Talmud text and a Braita or a Mishnaic text or a Tanaitic text, whichever way you want to call it. They can't, right, the Tanaitic, the Braita is going to have more authority. Okay, so it was recited in a Braita. It was taught in a Braita. The recital of the Shema must be as it is written. Therefore, meaning to say in Hebrew. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So this is important. So if you got a piece of paper, this might be worth writing down. I'm a chart person. You can see my chart from before. So I'll try and do it verbally as best I can. So, for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the Shema must be written in Hebrew, or recited in Hebrew, all right? Not in any other language. But the rabbis say it may be recited in any language. So now we have this dichotomy, all right? Hey, Max. The first side is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who says Shema must be recited in Hebrew, and the sages who say it may be recited in any language. The Gemara asks, why does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi say this? What's his reason? The verse states, right, because he's got a quote from a verse. That's going to be where his authority comes from. Says, now this is from Deuteronomy 6:6, which is from the Ve'ahavta. It says, and these words shall be, vayhiyu, right? They shall be, right? Meaning to say, teaching that these words and the words of the Shema must always shall be as they are, and therefore the Hebrew language. So he's looking at a really, really specific read at one tiny word, which literally translates shall be, right? Now, of course, it makes sense when you when they're talking about the words shall be. That's the quote from the itself in the Gemara text. It just says v'hayu, but we know that the full context is the words shall be. And so for him, that means that they have to be written in Hebrew. But let's make sure we understand. This is very technical. He's looking at one word and putting a lot of emphasis on it. Now the Gemara asks, and for the sages, what is their reason that they think it could be recited in any language? And the verse states, Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael, which could also be understood as understand, O Israel. Now, the word Shema in modern Hebrew means to hear, to listen, but in a rabbinic sense, it really means to, or in addition, it means to really understand, right? So for them, or for the sages, which is kind of the general authority, majority opinion kind of thing, they understand this to mean that when it says Shema Yisrael, it means understand Israel, which indicates that one may recite these words in any language that you hear, therefore understand. So if I recited in English, then that would count. If I recited in Portuguese, which I don't know, wouldn't count, right? So we have these two opinions and two different reasons why we're doing that. Okay. So it gets a little complicated from here. I think we can do it. Do my best. This part is super confusing. So you'll have to bear with me. So review before we jump ahead. We have Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who says the recitation of the Shema must be in Hebrew, and he does it from the words v'hayu. And the rabbis say you can recite it in any language because it says Shema, which means hearing, which means to understand. Those are the 2 points. So now this part goes like this. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi as well, isn't it indeed written here, Shema? What does he learn from this word, if not that the Shema may be recited in any language? See, the rabbis have this idea that if you say something, then if you quote a verse, that verse can only be used once. So here, the Gemara is asking, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right, he uses V'hayu. How does he understand Shema, if not the way the sages do? That's the question. Hey Josh, nice to see you. So, the Gemara answers, this word is necessary to teach something else. Make heard to your ears what your mouth is saying. Namely, the Shema must be recited audibly, not merely thought in one's heart. So for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he understands V'hayu to mean it has to be recited in Hebrew, and he understands Shema differently than the sages, which means to understand, and therefore could be recited in any language. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi understands Shema to mean that you have to recite it so that you can hear it. So you might have been in a synagogue where people are mumbling, right? That they're saying it out loud. Now you might think to yourself, why are they doing that? Right? So there's a tension between, I have to say this thing out loud, as you can tell here from the Talmud, but I also need to be able to hear it. It doesn't count if I can't hear it. So that's where this comes from, this idea. And so Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi has a different answer for the source of the text for Shema. So then it goes on like this. The Gemara asks, and how do the sages know this? The Gemara explains, they hold like the one who said that if one recites the Shema but does not make it audible to his ears, he has nevertheless fulfilled his obligation. So you might ask yourself, well, why didn't the sages say this? Why didn't they say Shema means you have to actually hear it? Because they have a different understanding, which is, even if I don't say it out loud, it doesn't matter, I still fulfilled my obligation. Now remember, we'll just take this moment and review, because this is Gemara gets very complicated, which is, we started out talking about the obligation about reading the Shema in order, and we took a brief detour where Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, V'hayu meant you had to read it in Hebrew, and the sages understood that you had to read it in any language from the word Shema, which meant understand or hear. And so we asked Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, what do you do with that? And he understands it that you actually have to be able to hear what you're saying. And the sages say, no, that's not true. Therefore, they don't need that interpretation. So now, and then we're going to ask the same question of the sages. Well, we asked Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, what did he do with the word Shema? Now we're going to ask the sages, what are they going to do with V'hayu? And the Gemara asks, and according to the sages as well, isn't it indeed written, V'hayu, and these words shall be? What do they learn from this, if not that the Shema must be recited in Hebrew? The Gemara answers that this word is necessary to teach, that one must not recite the words of the Shema out of order, but they shall be, V'hayu, as they are in the proper order. And finally, we've gone full circle, right? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi uses this word to understand that one should recite the Shema in Hebrew, but the sages don't need that. They understand Shema to mean you can recite it in any language, so it doesn't work for them. They take this word and they understand it to mean that you have to write in order, as it shall be. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says shall be, must be means language, and for the sages they mean it must be, it has to be in order. And we've gone full circle to finally answer the question. But the Gemara then asks, and from where does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi learn that one must not recite the Shema out of order? Right, so now we finally have the answer from the sages. We had to get there, it took a little while. Now we have to understand, well, where did Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi get this from? Now, it seems really confusing on the surface, right? What are we even asking all of this for? Now, it's important for us to understand that the rabbis see these obligations as being asked of us directly from the divine. That's no small thing. We have to take that seriously. And so that's why we're spending all this time. In addition, as I said in the beginning, for those of you who missed the very beginning, I'll refresh your memory here, which is we want to understand how to think rabbinically. It's not just about the answer. This back and forth about what you do with this word and that word, it's really about how do I think? How do I think Talmudically? How do I think rabbinically? How do I make decisions? That's so much of what Jewish learning is about. How do I make decisions? How do I walk through the world in a Jewish way? How do I make good decisions? Now this stuff is really tiny. It's about reciting the Shema. The Shema is also a declaration of faith, so this really matters. So anyway, back at the ranch, it says, where does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi understand that you can't recite it out of order? The Gemara answers, he derives it from the fact that the verse does not say just words, but the words. Not just dvarim, but ha-dvarim. Meaning, this refers to specific words, which teaches that they must be recited in their proper order without any variation. Right? So that definite article, the there, tells us that it's the specific words and not any words. The Gemara asks, right, moving along, and what do the sages learn from these phrase, ha-dvarim? Right? Now we're going back and forth and trying to understand what does everybody do with this. The difference between dvarim and ha-dvarim, words and the words, is inconsequential according to them. So, this is so funny to me, right? For the rabbis, doesn't matter. Right? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi understands something from it. For the rabbis, they don't read into it. It just goes to show the variety of opinions that we encounter all throughout the Talmud, and that's part of how we live Judaism now. There's so many ways to live Jewishly, to do Jewish, that we shouldn't get too lost. Now, of course, we're talking about really detailed things, so it's funny to say that, but we all understand this stuff differently, and the rabbis do here as well. Okay, moving along. Now, this part is super complicated, and I'll do my best here. So, just by sense of preview, and I found this part to be very confusing just for me as well, which is, and I've got my book here, so I'm looking at the screen as well as the book. That's why I'm not always looking at you. So let me just zoom out here for a moment. The rabbis are trying to understand, right? The dilemma that they're about to have is, all right, we have this debate about whether or not you can recite the Shema in one language or another. So if we say, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, you can only recite the Shema in Hebrew, one begs the question, well, if that's true about the Shema, well, maybe that's not true with the rest of the Torah, right? Maybe, how do we understand then that we can recite the Torah, the rest of the Torah in any language, if we're specifying the Shema? Right, that specificity versus generalization is such a real thing here, and that's something that they're really focusing on. So I'll give an example to kind of frame it. If a parent says to their child, "Clear off your bed in your very messy room," and the kid goes and clears off the bed, and the parent comes later and says, "Well, I told you to clean your room." No, the kid says, "You only told me to clear off my bed," right? There's that piece of, all right, when I say something specific, do I mean the general? Right, and that's part of what this is. So you'll do your best to try and understand this section, but don't worry if you don't. It's really complicated. So the question they're going to ask is, if because of the specificity we ask about the generalization, how do you deal with the words? Right, that's how they're going to the basis point. So, the Gemara analyzes the dispute. We'll do it first with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and then with the sages. Shall we say that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi maintains that the entire Torah may be recited in any language? Right? Because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi specified that the Shema must be recited in Hebrew. Therefore, we can say, maybe he says that he can recite the whole thing in any language. They specified the Shema, but not the whole Torah. As if it enters your mind to say that the entire Torah may be recited only in the sacred tongue, namely Hebrew, and not in any other language, why do I need the Torah to say V'hayu, and these words shall be? Right, so then they're going to ask the question, well, if we assume that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wants to specify Hebrew and use its V'hayu to that, and we want to say, well, Torah only is going to be specified, we're only going to recite Torah in Hebrew, then what do I even need these words for? Right, if I'm specifying the Shema, but I really mean the whole Torah, I've got superfluous reasons here. I have this reason that doubles up, right? If I mean to say that the whole Torah needs to be recited in Hebrew, and I only talk about the Shema, well, why did I only talk about the Shema when it applies to everything? That's the fundamental question here. And then they continue the question here. Why do I need these words with respect to the Shema? Why would I think the Shema is different from the rest of the Torah? Right? That's the question here. If I'm going to specify the Shema, but I really mean the whole Torah, why am I specifying the Shema? The Gemara then rejects this argument. It says there's no proof from here, as even if the Torah must generally be recited in Hebrew, it is nevertheless necessary to specify the matter here. I'm going to pause here before we get to the since. The Gemara says, the fact that you had to specify the Shema doesn't mean anything with the rest of the Torah, right? If we're saying the Torah must be recited, and the context here is in public readings, it doesn't matter that we're specifying the Shema. It's still important. Why is it still important? Without this specification about the Shema in particular, it might have entered your mind to say that in this context, Shema here means to understand as maintained by the sages, and that the Shema be recited in any language. Therefore, the Merciful One writes in the Torah, and these words shall be, to teach us that the Shema may be recited only in the original Hebrew. Meaning to say, it was necessary to teach this for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi because you might have thought the other way. Right? Let me say that again. We're teaching this, we're asking this question about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And he needs it. He needs this verse to mean what it means so that you don't think like the sages. Now, of course, we're about to read the sages part. It's going to say exactly the opposite. But understand, right, that the rabbis need these verses to mean certain things and not other things, because otherwise their paradigm doesn't hold up. That's what we're talking about here, is how do we keep our paradigm standing so you don't think about the other person's paradigm. Now, of course, this is kind of gymnastics with our mind here. So don't get, it's not like your person is going to fall apart, right? Who you are, but really an understanding how to think. So let's take a moment, try and find a personal example, right? I might need to believe a particular thing, and I believe it a particular way so that I don't think about it another way. I'm not sure if I can say it in a clearer way than that. It's a very confusing section, but we'll see what we can do. If you have any thoughts, please throw them in the comments. I would love to hear how you understand it. Certainly, I would love to learn from you as well. All right, let's try the other half. Maybe we'll find it. We'll find it there. So the Gemara suggests. Right now, we're going to flip and we're going to do the sages first. Shall we say that the sages maintain that the entire Torah must be recited specifically in the sacred tongue, Hebrew? Right? Because we understand, remember, that the sages, they believe that you could recite the Shema in any language, right? And since they specified about the Shema, we're going to say the opposite about the rest of the Torah. So if they're saying the Shema be recited in any language, then the Torah can be recited only in Hebrew. That's the back and forth here that we're playing with. As if it enters your mind to say, and almost always when it says that, they actually are going to reject it in the end, like we saw. If it enters your mind to say that the entire Torah may be recited in any language, why do I need the Torah to write Shema here with respect to the Shema? Why would one think the Shema is different from the rest of the Torah? So it's exactly the same question we asked Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, right? if I'm going to say this about the Shema, why do I need to specify this particular word? Why do I need to understand it in this particular way in order for me to make it work? The Gemara rejects this argument. Right? Even if the Torah may generally be recited in any language, it was nevertheless necessary to specify the matter here. Right? Without such specification, it would enter your mind to say v'hayu, that the words v'hayu, and these words shall be, to teach the Shema be recited only in Hebrew, as asserted by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Therefore, the Merciful One writes the word here, Shema, in the Torah to teach us that the Shema be recited in any language. Now, of course, we have two conclusions, and so instead of thinking of them as one after another in a linear way, this is really about putting these two things in parallel. If we're going to think for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and we're going to make this kind of specification, doesn't that seem superfluous? The answer is no. We needed it so we don't think like the sages. And on the other side, sages, you think it a particular way, it seems superfluous. No, we need it so that you don't think like Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. That's what we're talking about here. Now, this is about structuring our thinking. It's about understanding how the rabbis are thinking. So let's just take a step back here, understand what it is that we read, kind of do a 3,000 feet up, 30,000 feet up kind of thing. We talked about the order of I'm going to switch the screen here so you can see my beautiful face instead of the text. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the Mishnah, which talked about how do we understand the instruction to read the Megillah in a particular order, right? We had an answer, we had a verse. It was then applied broader to Hallel and the Shema and the Amidah. The Amidah section would start right after this. We're going to pause here for tonight. I feel like this is a good place to end. And then we jumped into this question about Hallel. We had 4 or 5 different answers as to why you can't recite it out of order. And then we jumped into this question about the Shema. And the Shema is, we're being told it can be recited in certain languages and not others. It has to be in this order and that order. You have to say it out loud so that we can hear it. All of these different things. And so we should understand that the world, and truth, we also think this way. That's what a normal conversation is like, is associative. We move from one thing to the next, associating the things, as opposed to thinking only linearly. And so the takeaway, the pieces of Talmud learning that I want you to walk away with today is you need certain verses to do certain things for you, and you can't use it for something else. So if I make an argument for anything, like here we go, I'll give a strange example. I think forks are the best utensil, and I think that way because of this verse in the Torah. And you say, no, I think spoons are the best utensil because of this verse. Then, hello, Uri. Then, I have to ask, well, what do I do with your verse about spoons? What do you do with my verse about forks? Right? Strange example, but it's about understanding how do I build a belief system for me, and how do I deal with other people who have different beliefs, right? How do I understand where their sources come from? And that's a paradigm here that is absolutely a part of understanding Talmud, and a piece to this here. And then we get into this big conversation about this last piece about not understanding it like the other guy. Now, you could see this cynically, which is, I need to stand firm in my beliefs and reject yours, and vice versa. But I think what the rabbis are really understanding this section of Talmud and the kinds of things that we see that are like this, which is, we don't want to generalize too much. We want to challenge our assumptions. We want to delve deeply into it. And we want to understand ourselves as distinct from the person next to you. So just because I believe something and you believe something doesn't make either of us wrong or either of us right. We have to analyze it. In the end, it's okay for you and I to disagree if we understand the world differently. I think that's really what the takeaway here is. So I think this is a nice start. Let me know in the comments if this was useful for you. If you watched it after it was recorded, I'll try and check back in if you made comments or questions, and I can try and answer them. let me know if this was something that was useful for you. This was a super technical, not super exciting piece of Talmud, but I enjoyed learning it with you. So have a wonderful rest of the evening, depending on where you are in the country, or afternoon. And I look forward to learning Talmud. Subscribe to my page so that you can catch Monday Mishnah, a weekly Mishnah study. We're in Brachot. There's plenty of time to catch up. They're only 60 to 120 seconds long, no more than a minute or two. So sign up for that so that you can do that. Like my page, Rabbi Jeremy Marquise, for more of these. That's where we're streaming this from. And have a great evening. And happy Pesach. We're now within a month. Terrifying to think. Okay, have a good one. Bye.